Wrong overlay.
Oh my goodness.
Good start. That's the one. This is the Team
Oh
Objection
my
Podcast from March 21st, 2023, episode 568. I'm juggling a few things like getting messages for, work as it's happening. So.
Oh, I thought you meant like spam messages like...
No, it's just work. It's always work. It's never not work. It'll be work until the day I fucking die.
But you'll retire someday.
I don't think that's true. My predecessor didn't reach retirement.
Oh, now you made it too real.
Yeah, well, that's the kind of way I've been feeling the last few weeks in particular. Turns out furloughs will do that to a motherfucker.
I've been through furloughs before. Not recently, fortunately, but yeah, it's pretty bad.
Now, in the interest of not being fired today, I'm not going to talk about this at length, although I'd love to just do a tell-all when I leave this industry. I could go for an entire hour talking about all this shit, but...
I'm excited.
Yeah, but no. That's not what we're here for today. I briefly thought about talking about the Suns today because I have a few things I kind of wanted to vent about, but the truth is, at least for me, I'm trying not to care too much right now because ultimately it's just about trying to maintain seeding, and then we'll do a playoff preview when the time comes because there is one, Kevin Durant missing, and
that's a factor.
And of course, there was a DeAndre Ayton missing last game, etc. So, Instead, we're going to be bringing back an old segment. I had a long conversation with Sean when we were coming down for one of the concerts we did in the last month about just kind of like the balance of the show and if we liked where we were at or if we thought maybe we should change things up. And the truth is, I've mentioned it on air multiple times, I like where we're at overall. I like the fact that we have all these different things to choose from. There's a game show we do on a recurring basis. We have full-on episode reviews. We have, multiple segments sitting in the wings sometimes. We can do full shows on just one topic like we did with AI or something else. Lots of stuff at our disposal, but then I think there's some old stuff that we used to do that could still make an appearance from time to time. And as a result, the thing we're doing this episode is Hall of Fame. Remember Hall of Fame?
Vaguely. I think the last time we did Hall of Fame, a certain Michelle might have been on the show. It's possible. I think 2018 is my guess when the last time we did this was. Which was coincidentally the last time that I bought my PC that I generally use that is now basically completely shot. So PCs last 5 years apparently. Yeah. So Doug, if you're out there,
life though. I mean, unless you get really high end, because this whole thing that's happening in front of me and off the side of the frame for the viewers is essentially like. I guess it's right about 5 years old because mine died not too long after we moved into this place, and I had to basically retool the whole setup.
Okay, Doug, I see you in the chat. Call me. I might need a computer, okay? I saw your chat.
To be fair, I did tell him that even before we went live. I was like, he can probably set you up with a much better deal than you're going to get just, from going to a Best Buy and getting it all in one or something.
Yep, that's why I said, Doug, if you're out there. I'm putting up the Doug signal, whatever that light bulb looks like.
It's just a silhouette of Doug's head, I think.
Pretty much.
So, Hall of Fame, if you don't know what that is, because, again, it is from hundreds of episodes ago now.
God.
I should go look and see, actually. Maybe I'll work on that when you're talking one of these times. Otherwise, I'll have to work on work in between.
Well, you sure as hell won't be listening to me.
Yeah, there you go. You can tech guy while I'm vamping. Just to see. I assume I would have put Fame in the title. I usually try to in some capacity, but I don't know.
It's so many. It's so many episodes.
I'm trying to remember if we did it in a video version, because if not, that puts us pre-370 or so. So that would be 200. Point being, it is old. So for people who may have joined us in the last couple of years, Hall of Fame is not super hard to understand. In fact, it's a relic, but not such an old relic that it goes back to the time when our segments had really confusing and dumb names. Hall of Fame is where we look at either celebrities or fictional characters, and then we put them into, these categories of sorts. We talk about their careers to this point, if they're a fictional character, their background, their story, whatever it might be. And then we rank them on a scale of 10, like everything else we do with reviews and whatnot. And then we have these 4 tiers. There's the Hall of Fame, so aptly named, but it's tough to get into because you got to have at least an 8. So that's with an average. So it means everybody has to be on board with that person. Or there's a few other tiers. There's the Hall of Tame, and the Hall of Shame, and the Hall of Lame. Shame is the lowest. We've had nobody in either Lame or Shame yet.
But
I had to make an executive decision. We've actually alluded to this before when we talked about J.K. Rowling. She is currently in the Hall of Tame, because
I ranked her low, just so everybody knows.
So did I.
I had her very low.
Granted, I'm not a Harry Potter fan, so that was also part of it, if
But
I'm being honest. I'm not just going to make an executive decision to put her into one of those tiers, but I'm removing her from the Hall of Tame. She's in Tame, yeah.
Yes.
I'm removing her. The viewers can't see this, but as we're speaking right now, I'm taking her name out of Tame, where M. Night Shyamalan is, by the way. That might also be a mistake. I'm just going to put her in the question mark tier. The next time Sean is on, we're going to make a ruling. We're going to revote. We're not going to go into the whole thing again. We talked about it a lot in the Hogwarts Legacy episode, but we're just going to do a quick vote on her at some point. Maybe the next time we do the segment when Sean's here, and we're going to see where she falls now, because, spoiler alert, it's not going to be in Tame.
It's not going to be in Fame either.
No, it's definitely not going to go up. It's not going to be like, you know what, trans rights don't matter. Hall of Fame, you're in. There's like a whole music playing and a red carpet ceremony.
We'll get the play the entire show out video music.
Yeah.
I did the tech work here. Looks like episode 392 on May 23rd, 2019 was the last time that we did this.
2019. What episode was that?
392.
392.
So we did have video.
It was within the last 200, barely.
And we are. It was Ryan Reynolds and Jim Carrey.
Okay, those were the two latest additions, because I just put them in order left to right, so I guess that makes sense.
Yep. So
right.
I don't remember how we voted them. I bet you probably have them. It's probably worth going over who we've done before and where they stand.
Yeah, I suppose. The mistake I made when I was putting these in way back when is I didn't put their final scores, so I can only tell you where they've all ended up. And the Hall of Fame includes Bryan Cranston, Stephen Colbert, George Lucas, Link from Legend of Zelda, and Bruce Willis. And I think all those hold up okay.
Yeah, Bruce Willis is, Fame is like, that one I probably argued with it at that time. It was like, Bruce Willis is fine. I got no problem with him. Fame, that's really, really high.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of at this point. So then we have Hall of Tame. This is a 6 to a 7.9. You had to have exactly an 8, no rounding up to make Hall of Fame. And Tame includes M. Night, like we talked about, Johnny Depp, which, there's the whole Amber Heard thing since the last time we voted on that.
It depends on which side of that you're on. You can go either way, really, with this one.
Yeah. His career has gone down since then, so that's a factor as well.
Mm-hmm.
Seth MacFarlane, who you could argue could maybe rise a little bit. I don't know if he'd make Fame still. Adam Sandler, Ryan Reynolds, and Jim Carrey are all in Tame. Now, the problem with this is, so far, we've really only tried to do good candidates. We wanted to make sure it was people that are going to be interesting. So we haven't really picked any layup 0, 1, 2 kind of candidates to put in the Hall of Shame. We're going to fix that going forward. Now, this was the first one back, so I figured we'd go for good candidates. But we need to put some people into those halls so that they're not just barren and empty when we have tourists come through.
I'm picturing that, of them walking through a Hall of Fame and who do they rank the lowest? It's like the John Travolta meme where he's like,
I'm imagining a Madame Tussauds wax museum setup where we have wax statues of all these celebrities, and then the one for J.K. Rowling is an effigy and it's burning. I think that'd be fun. It won't last very long if it's burning. It's made of wax, but
no, we'll figure out the perpetual burning.
Okay, yeah, we'll make that happen. Fake
Sean
flames.
once made me had me do a Mary for Buck kill for a Christmas tree that's perpetually on fire. I think he can figure it out some way if that's what he's going to do.
Yeah, that seems fair. I can't see chat because there's a camera in the way. Hold on.
Doug says Bruce Willis is going through some issues, as it turns out, so I say give him a break. And I agree with you. I have nothing wrong with him. It was more of meh.
He's in the Hall of Fame, so because you could argue he's the biggest action star of all time. Could. I don't know that I would. He's definitely up there. You could probably make a case for about anybody who's in the Expendables, but especially now as more time goes on, now it's going to be now do you start putting Keanu up there because he goes all the way back to Speed, but also maintains with the John Wicks. I don't know. Keanu's on our list of people that are going to come up at some point, so we'll see what, eventually, maybe at some point I'll go back and do the work. It's just annoying to have to go through each episode and find the exact point where we scored it and then add them all up, and then so it's going to be a project I have to do. But I should.
I'll help you out. I've been going through archives, so I can help you out.
Okay, because we need to have the average score so we can not only put them in each tier, but also figure out like how close it was and who's above who.
This is important historically.
That's right. In the future, historians will look back on this, and rather than making their own value judgments, they're just going to look at what we did, and that's going to be it.
They don't know. 500 years from now, they're going to be like, what the hell? Who's Johnny Depp?
Yeah. How many? I have to watch 19 Pirates of the Caribbean movies? I don't want to have to do that to figure out how good Johnny Depp was. You people, tell me.
But they have to listen to 500, 600 episodes to figure out which one it's in.
That's right. All right, so we're going to start with what I think is the least, I was going to say controversial, but that's not necessarily true. But I think the most normal of the three, because there's a cartoon character in this set, and there's a person who in the last year has become a cartoon character. We're going to get to them later. We're going to do 3 of them this time. It used to be 2, but there's only 2 people voting for now. I will also let Sean weigh in later with his votes in case it matters, because this is our entire show's haul. So I may give him a vote later, but we'll see. He's not here, so maybe I won't. But we'll start with our first candidate as the most normal of the 3, and that's Mark Hamill. Dave, you like Mark Hamill. I give you the floor.
Okay. I mean, Mark Hamill, man, the guy is obviously most well known by far as Luke Skywalker. There's really no second place, I don't think you can say. He's done other work, obviously. He's been good in his other work, most notably the voice of the Joker, doing other voice acting, pretty good. Seems like a good dude overall. It is just so amazing to me that in the 70s and the 80s, Star Wars was the biggest thing in the world. Mark Hamill was the central good guy, the central protagonist, and yet post Star Wars, it felt like Harrison Ford got every role in the world, and Mark Hamill was kind of like, yeah, remember me? I was in Star Wars too, remember? It's just kind of crazy how Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill kind of split as far as what happened in the future for them. But from everything I've ever heard, he seems like a real stand-up dude. So that's a good basis to start on if you're going to get in the Hall of Fame, is be famous and not be a dick.
Yeah, especially in light of recent developments with people we talked about earlier. I would say, I mean, there's nothing that's going to approach Luke Skywalker. Doug brings up Firelord Ozai, so for Avatar fans, that's a big one. The elephant in the room is the Joker. For a lot of people, they would say, Jack Nicholson is their definitive Joker, or Heath Ledger, of course. And I don't think anybody would say Jared Leto. But, regardless, as far as the animated Joker goes, that's kind of one of the most iconic voices in all of cartoons. And he's wavered on whether he wants to keep going back to it or not. At times he said he's done and then come back for one more project. I suspect now that Kevin Conroy has died, who was the voice of Batman for all those years, that he might actually be done with it now, just sort of out of respect for his old friend, if nothing else. But again, while that was a part for me, because I loved Batman the Animated Series growing up, that's not nearly as mainstream as Luke Skywalker. That's a fool's errand. So, but I still think it needs to be included as far as consideration, because people may not even realize that's the same person. Maybe they're even familiar with the Joker. They're like, oh, he has that distinct laugh, and they don't realize that that's actually the guy from Star Wars.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I like the most about, I think a lot of, Carrie Fisher had this a little bit, Mark Hamill has definitely had this too, is they realized to an extent that they were never going to hit the same level that they hit with Star Wars. And so they kind of veered off and did other projects. Carrie Fisher would do some sitcoms and stuff where she'd be like absolutely crazy character. Mark Hamill, did guest appearances like on The Simpsons, for example, where he kind of made fun of himself for being Luke Skywalker. And it was just, I like when celebrities to an extent have done, hit their peak at a very early time, try to do other projects and done well with it, but realized, hey, this is what people want, and they're okay with it to an extent. It's a little bit of the opposite of what Leonard Nimoy did back in the day, where he had Spock killed off because I don't want to be known as Spock anymore. And then eventually had to come back and be like, yeah, I'm Spock. Everyone knows me as Spock, so I'm just going to keep doing it. So I think Mark Hamill did a good job of kind of leaning into that.
It's got to be tough, right? Because, it's the same with bands where you put out a new album and everybody either complains that it's too similar to the past stuff you've done, or it's too different from the past stuff you've done, so you can't ever win. And then when you're touring, if you want to play, you're going to be playing 30 gigs in a North American tour, and it's like, all right, so we're going to play the same songs 30 times. We're going to mix and match, and then people are going to be disappointed. So similarly, it's like, okay, so if you're Harrison Ford, you've got several different massive roles, right, that you can lean on. Because, obviously Han Solo, but also Indiana Jones and some of his more recent stuff. he's got a ton, right? Mark Hamill kind of only has the one. He's done other things in his career, even in some like recurring roles on shows. But I think, to your point, I think you probably resent that for a while, and then I think after more time passes, you realize, okay, this has given me a lot. Yes, it can be a little much. Just be like, Luke Skywalker, do the "you're not my father" line. Like, okay, but overall, it's been more of a blessing than a curse, and I think people with time realize that.
Yeah, I think you hit a point where, and I mean, I don't know this. I don't know his, obviously, financial situations, how that works for people, but I imagine, he made a lot of money off of Star Wars. Continually has made a lot of money off of Star Wars, but I imagine that he felt a bit of emptiness when he wasn't doing anything, because if he didn't want to be Luke, he probably didn't get the roles he wanted to do. So he's like, you know what? I like acting. It's given me a lot, and it's provided for the life that he has, which I'm quite sure he doesn't have to worry for anything anymore in his life. No. So, hey, great. You want me to dress up as Luke and swing around this light sword? Sure. Fine.
By the way, live troubleshooting, I do hear myself coming through on your speakers a little bit.
Oh, lovely. This is just lovely. I hate everything right now.
Yeah, his computer's a mess today. It's a miracle we're even up and running. It's like duct tape. Regardless, because if I can hear it without headphones, it means viewers can hear it too.
Tell me, Doug.
Yeah. I do think one more point in his favor now is like he had a chance to sort of come to terms with this because of the newer trilogy. One of the things that I think, again, I guess you could resent the fact that it came back, but it seemed like it seemed like him and Carrie Fisher were like super on board. Harrison Ford has never really seemed to love Han Solo, and to be fair, he's not in the new trilogy for very long anyways. But for the two of them, it did seem like a chance to tap back into something that they really did like. And now, as a result, it's like, okay, all right, it's been long enough. It's clear that my career is not going to have taken too many other twists and turns. So, like, I can embrace what this is. I do think it makes it a little bit difficult for voting because stand-up human being, I can even, as Dave kind of futzes with this a little more, I can even give you a Flagstaff-specific story. I don't know if I ever told this on the air.
Ooh, please do.
It's a small connection, and at this point, I mean, I guess with someone of his stature in a town of our size, you kind of had to settle for that. But just before the pandemic, so like January or February of 2020, the Bookman's here in Flagstaff, which for non-Arizona folks is like a used bookstore. It has records and games and some other stuff. It's like a resale place. It stumbled across this vinyl, and if I'm remembering it right, essentially like it was a piece of Star Wars memorabilia. It had been signed by a number of people. I think Mark was one of them. And I think John Williams had signed it as well. Obviously, if it makes sense, if it was a record, Williams the composer. And somehow they got their hands on it. Somebody brought it in and didn't realize what they had somehow. And they essentially traded it in. And Bookman's went, hey, this looks kind of like unique. I don't know.
Oh my God.
We weren't able to ask what they got for it. They didn't want to disclose that because it makes sense. It's a customer. But I'm sure they didn't get what it was worth at the very least. But they actually reached out to Mark Hamill after they got it in. So rather than reselling it, they reached out to him, and then he actually thanked them in a tweet. And so they got some extra exposure out of it. So they came out looking pretty good. So again, tiny connection. But for him to take the time just to be to send them an actual letter that he signed, and just a really nice interaction that showcased that humanity that was such a plus that you gave him earlier. He just seems like a legitimately cool dude, and it's as a result, it's tough to score him because he's a great person. He has one massive role. Is that enough to put him in the Hall of Fame? Oh, and you're muted now, Dave, for what it's worth. So that's awkward. Now I have to carry the show even worse than before. Still muted, I'm sorry to say. Now he's muted and he can't hear me telling him that he's muted. He's giving me a weird thumbs up. No matter how many times he talks, it doesn't. So I guess either we get my echo or no Dave volume. This is good. It's
cool.
Live television.
How about now?
Oh, I got you.
Hooray. Apparently we get echo. I don't know. So this is wonderful. I'll plug my headphones in back when I'm done. But my last point I was going to make about this was I thought I'd give him so much credit for his portrayal of Luke again in the newer trilogy. I think that he portrayed him as a sassy guy, which probably it was easy to do with his own feelings towards it, but he also took it seriously in a really good way. It really made those movies better, even though I have a lot of issues with those movies. But his portrayal of it was definitely not the reason it was bad.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he was always kind of sassy, right? To an extent. And some of that you could blame on, like, the exuberance of youth in the first trilogy. So it's like, he's so young, but he has a lot thrust upon him, and so many crazy things happen. But I kind of like the fact that he's become sort of curmudgeonly, but still in like not a negative way. Like he's get off my lawn, but he's still very much willing to help and try and guide people as much as he can, considering how much of a disaster it was the last time.
He's get off my lawn, but also I want to give you a hug at the same time.
Since you're not getting off my lawn, since you refuse to get off my lawn, I will now embrace you reluctantly.
So we got to score him somehow, some way.
We do. 1 to 10. You can go decimal points. I mean, again, it's going to be an average. And the tricky part about this is a lot of times it's like, well, by the time the last person goes, you'll kind of know sort of what the target is. You can do some quick mental math. It's going to be even easier with 2 people. I'm conflicted about this because I gave Dave a whole list of people to choose from, and I let him kind of decide. So I hadn't really formed too many opinions on many of them, just as who knew who was going to come up. I don't think... it's so tough because I want to give him extra credit for the personal stuff and the fact that even though he was a young star in a massive blockbuster, it never really seemed to go to his head. He never really went astray. I don't think I can give him higher than an 8. And that sucks just because professionally what he's done has been great, but he just doesn't have the breadth of career that a lot of other people we've had up for consideration or will have up for consideration have. I'm going to go 7.7, which means you have the ability to sway this if you want, but keep in mind we will get Sean's vote in the future.
Yep, this is the fun part is that we get Sean in the future. So our 2 votes, we can get a preliminary finding, but we won't tell Sean because he's not going to listen. So he'll give his own opinion, and then we can tell him if he got in or not. I like this way more.
Okay.
So my thought process was 7.5, 7.5. And again, great, seems like a great person. One great movie, lived on it. Great. I'm glad he did that. But I mean, it's a Hall of Fame. Like there's a lot that goes into that. So, I don't think that the breadth of work is quite there. I'm going to be very happy for him, but 7.5.
7.6 average. So we know where he's supposed to end up. We'll see if that ends
we were
up
right there together, really. I mean, we were not off.
I wanted to put it higher.
Yeah.
I really did. And I'm like, again, we take this probably more seriously than we should, all things considered. But it's like, it needs to matter for it to be a segment. It can't just be, put everybody in the Hall of Fame. Are you a decent human being? You're in the Hall of Fame. So it's like, it needs to have some gravitas. And as a result, we have a lot of people in Tame, which is unfortunate. Again, we'll have to correct this in the future, even if we put 3 shitty ones in and just talk bad about them the whole time. But for the time being, unless Sean gives a much higher score than I'm expecting, I think he's going to settle in Tame.
I can imagine that he'll probably settle there, but as long as we don't tell him what our scores were, because I could see him going counterculture and be like, "What? It's Luke Skywalker, 10 out of 10."
That's right. Yeah, we won't give him any inclination, so it'll be a surprise to him as much as anybody else.
Great.
He's gonna have to give him like an 8.7 or higher, I think, to average out in a way that's gonna.
Yeah, we need a 24 total out of 3.
And we gave a
22.2.
That can't be right.
No.
We gave a 15.2.
15.
So 8.6. I was close. Yeah. It's going to have to be an 8.6 or higher.
I don't want to be here anymore. That was the dumbest thing I've ever seen.
You're the numbers guy. I do words for a living. Then again, mental math always was sort of a struggle. Doug says, yeah, Master Ericus from Kingdom Hearts. A good role. He's also dead now. Skeletor. I mean, he's got other stuff in the catalog for sure. It's just when you look at, I mean, you mentioned Harrison Ford, who is on our list for the future. And again, we mentioned him earlier. It's like Harrison Ford has much more in that IMDb page than Mark Hamill does.
Yeah. I mean, I know Mark Hamill's done a lot of things, but the prestige is quite different.
Yeah. And again, I mean, some of he's become a very good voiceover actor, which is, I'm sure, a weird turn for people who only know him as Luke, but I don't think it's quite enough. Voice actors are getting a little bit of recognition, but they're still no more than like J-tier celebrities. And those are the biggest ones, like a Troy Baker or a Laura Bailey. Like, even then, they don't really rise to that mainstream level.
you also know Harrison Ford is 80 years old now?
Yeah.
80.
Yeah, it's not great. Because, like, you know, he looked so young back then. And he was obviously always more classically attractive than Mark Hamill, who still was a good-looking guy back in the Star Wars movies. But now it's like Mark Hamill's only 71. It really shows off the gap between them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess it was more striking then when the gap was, you know, shrunk in the sense of like he was 21 and Harrison Ford was 30. But you still get the idea. Like there's a bigger gap than I think people would realize. All right, candidate number 2. I want to save the most controversial one for last, and I think you've selected a good one to get off of the list. He's been on here for a while, but it's a good time to do it because, let's be honest, Sean's never really cared about The Simpsons anyways, and that means we're going with one Homer J. Simpson, because who else would you go with if you're taking the first character from that show? I mean, yeah,
Bart, maybe.
No, you got to go Homer, especially because it's going to be interesting to see where he falls, and I would love to know what Sean would rate him, but I guess we'll find out later.
I mean, it's a real plight on Sean that he doesn't know The Simpsons that well. Like, you don't have to be encyclopedic, kind of like me and my sister have been, because we watched it just relentlessly growing up. But it is the classic sitcom of the 90s. I mean, the only thing that's going to bring him down maybe is the 2000s on, the 2010s on, really, which is kind of sad in a way. But the things that Homer has gotten into, the writers for him, the amount of classic lines, the amount of the longevity of the memes that Homer has had is kind of crazy to me, that there's an entire generation that are now adults that were born after The Simpsons wasn't good anymore that still recognizes Homer is crazy to me. And I don't know. I grew up with it. I grew up with watching The Simpsons, and it is, I mean, it's to me, the greatest animated comedy of all time, and the classic era is some of the best TV ever made. So that's a good start for him.
Yeah, we've talked about The Simpsons a little bit. We had the animated show Tourney. We've had, you know, some other opportunities to kind of talk about it more at length. At this point, I would love to do a time capsule for it, speaking of old segments, but it needs to end before we can put it in a time capsule.
It needs to end and then be 20 years later, right?
At least 10, I think, was the cutoff we were doing, yeah. So it's going to be a little while before we can do that. And I know people would just say it needs to end, period. I'm still not on that boat. I know, obviously, I don't think anybody's really arguing The Simpsons is approaching the peaks it used to. I don't know if it could. Because you could say those first 8 seasons or so are like pinnacle of television level. But regardless, I mean, I think it's interesting to see just how things have changed. Homer is one of those because in the earlier seasons, I think the best way to describe him would be like, he's stupid. No question. I mean, nobody's arguing that. But like, in general, he had a heart of gold. Like, he was, you know, there's no question he wasn't smart. He can't even smell smart. But in general, like, he was trying to help out his family. Yeah, he would choke Bart sometimes, but you know, usually he would feel bad when he did things wrong. He was really trying to make sure he did right by his son and his 2 daughters and his wife. Like, and then it felt like, especially in the middle years, it's almost, to me, it's ironic because there's not really a lot of similarities between Family Guy and The Simpsons, other than the obvious ones on the server. They're both animated shows on Fox. They both have like a similar cast. Like, but one way I think it did get similar was both Peter and Homer eventually went from dumb but lovable to mean at times. More so Peter than Homer, but still both of them felt like their characteristics changed as the show went on, especially in the middle part before they kind of corrected from that a bit. Is that a weird assessment, or am I onto something here?
No, you're definitely onto it. And I think that the hard part for The Simpsons and the hard part for Homer specifically was The Simpsons was always written as a counterculture to the 80s. You know, the 80s sitcoms, Family Ties, The Feel Good, The Families, The Cosby Show, all these things that were back then where it's like, we're going to have wholesome messages and we're going to learn things and then we're going to have nice TV families. And then The Simpsons comes along and blows that out of the water and is the most popular thing in the world by not being good, by being controversial, by being rebellious, by having Bart swear, having Homer, you know, not have a good job and take care of his family and screw up. It was so refreshing at the time. But then, of course, after 10, 15 years, you your rebelliousness is difficult when you are the culture because of what the Simpsons became. And so Homer almost had to go into farther, and they had to keep going that extra step and taking that extra thing. And that's when, to me, it became not as good of a show anymore, was when they really started getting into what is called jerk-ass Homer, where, he'll shove Marge out of the way. There was an episode, I'm pretty sure, where he was drunk driving, and he put her behind the wheel after a car crash. It's like, what the hell? Like, that's not okay. I can't remember. That might have been a Family Guy episode. Regardless, either one of them, like, that's just like, that's evil, basically, at this point. And Homer was always dumb and didn't think of others all the time. But when he realized it, he would try to fix it. Not, oh shit, I'm in trouble, I'm going to just throw anyone else under the bus that's around me. That's not what Homer was. And for the purposes of this, I know I have to take it into consideration, but it's not a lot of consideration I'm going to take it under.
It's tough because, I mean, obviously characters sort of have to go on a journey, even if they are sort of frozen in place, like many of these animated comedies are, because we've had future episodes where Lisa was grown up and president or whatever, but like in general, they're all still in the same grade, the same age, etc. However, I guess there's an inevitability to it where, like, there was no way they could keep The Simpsons at the level where it was, because you can only tell those stories. And then you can't, what are you going to do? Similar versions of them with a different coat of paint? Because that's not going to be well received. Or you have to start reaching for stories beyond just those more simple ones, where it was more about like the core family and their values. So, like, no matter what, I guess you were sort of doomed. Unless you were willing to have the characters start aging, which also would have raised its share of complaints from some of the audience, then you're kind of stuck in a storytelling method that is sort of limited in what it can do. It's a fool's errand no matter what. And I guess, you can argue The Simpsons could have done a better job than they did in those middle decade of seasons, but I don't envy the task that they had, because at a certain point it's like, okay, we've done the story of, is Homer cheating on Marge like 3 different ways now, or is Marge cheating on Homer? And there's only so much you can do, right?
Well, I mean, really what happened was the era of Homer stumbling into, oh my God, it's Kim Basinger. Oh my God, it's Alec Baldwin. What are you doing in Springfield? And the best Simpsons episodes were the ones back where they would have a celebrity guest, but they wouldn't necessarily play themselves. They'd play somebody else. And I always loved those ones. There were a few where they got made fun of themselves. I think Red Hot Chili Peppers was on one, and it was actually they did a good job because it was a cameo appearance. Aerosmith was on it, cameo appearance. The ones where they focused the entire episode on that celebrity was like, okay, that's just, to me, cheap writing.
Yeah, and I Leonard Nimoy comes to mind. That's one that I kind of like. Like, I think back to that, and I'm like, that's funny. But in general, I hadn't really thought about the celebrity guest, but now I'm thinking of, more recent seasons where I'll see a post about an upcoming episode, and it's like, here's whomever guest star. Jennifer Lawrence is guest starring in this week's episode of The Simpsons, and I'm like, that does absolutely nothing for me.
No.
Now, maybe nothing would. I haven't actually watched a Simpsons episode when it was new on a Sunday night in God knows how long, so maybe there's nothing that'll move the needle, but that's not it. I know that for sure, because I'm like, cool, I guess. Like, I'm glad that people are still finding it relevant, and it's cool to have celebrities on it, but it was not what I liked about the show at any point.
No. And really, it's funny. I think the show started about Bart and his rebelliousness and turned into Homer and some of his adventures, some of his everything in that show in the first 10 seasons, I'd say, was his journey of being someone who isn't that intelligent, but also could figure things out on his own and would get himself into trouble and then get himself out of trouble a lot of times. Just wanting to kind of be impulsive. And that, as far as a character goes, really led to a lot of ability to bond with what he was going through, because you're watching him thinking like, man, I don't know that I would have done that, but at least he's trying to fix it. Or, man, I wish I could be that impulsive sometimes. They had an entire episode where he taught Ned how to be impulsive. So there's a lot of things that was very relatable. Later seasons, you couldn't have that relatability to him, and you'd be like, wow, you're just being an ass, and that's it. Like, it's hard to relate to someone who's just doing horrible things.
I think you're right, and I think where I have to start drawing a line on this is with fictional characters, we're in a little bit of a different boat than celebrities. Celebrities have like their roles and their personal life. Mm-hmm. Fictional characters have like what they've done in their medium and then the legacy they've left behind. I mean, the reason why Link made it into Hall of Fame was because you could argue he's the most influential video game character of all time.
Mm-hmm.
There are others up on that list. Obviously, Mario comes to mind, and several others who have approached that level. But the fact remains that you can't get more than 3 or 4 names deep in a video game character list without at least mentioning him. Whether you love the Zelda games or not, what cultural impact they've had is undeniable. So with Homer Simpson, now the question becomes, I mean, I went and looked real quick just because I was curious as far as context, and while it's cheating to just look at Wikipedia, he was the greatest character of the last 20 years in 2010 in Entertainment Weekly, the second greatest cartoon character by TV Guide, behind only Bugs Bunny, who was kind of really important. Like when we talk about the impact of Homer Simpson and not just like the strange journey he's been on, because we're not going to be like, well, I really liked Homer in the beginning, but then when they start focusing on the nuclear power plant as much, I didn't like that. We're not considering that type of stuff for Hall of Fame, but impact wise, I mean, you could put, have you seen those like reductive versions of characters where it's like you strip down all the elements, but it's like their shape and their colors, and like you would recognize Homer Simpson. Anybody would. Even if people haven't really watched The Simpsons in the last 10 or 15 years, you know who the hell Homer Simpson is.
Yep.
So now it's a question of like, how much does that matter in our voting coming up here?
Yep. Yellow cylinder, white circle, two blue cylinders at the bottom. It's like you can just go geometric there, and you're like, oh yeah, that's Homer. Like that's it.
Maybe, do you get the strands of hair? Maybe. Do you get the MG on the ear and the hair above the ear? Maybe.
But yeah, I mean, as far as you go with fictional characters, cultural impact, I don't know how much bigger of a name you can get in cultural impact for fictional characters. In the 90s, The Simpsons was it. It was everything. Everybody watched it. It was the most popular show on TV at the time, and continued that way for a long period of time, and was some of the best TV on at all. So in cultural impact, I don't know who you could argue more so.
Well, I think, the zeitgeist argument is always interesting, but it's like, I don't know why we keep going back to Harrison Ford, but he's the example tonight. You can see Harrison Ford in any of those iconic characters he played. If you had to make somebody do like a Family Feud type thing where you asked them to name the first character, different people would say a Han Solo and Indiana Jones or whatever, right? In this case, there is nothing else. Homer is Homer. He's been in this one role. And yes, because he's been portrayed by Dan Castellaneta, whatever, great. But like, there are no other examples. There is nothing else pulling your focus. It is just this role, this TV dad, who you could argue, again, is maybe the most influential TV father of all time. Now, I think you have to give some Archie Bunkers and some respect in that argument, but the point is, he's in the conversation. Again, like, whether you like the fact that The Simpsons has endured for basically 30 years at this point or not, it has, and so few shows, animated or not, have done that. Now, that's not all to Homer's credit, but I think the lion's share of it is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, he was the most iconic character for the longest period of time. He's what was the focus of the show. The most episodes have been written about him. I mean, they go around the whole city, the whole family, but the lion's share of the episodes have been written about him and whatever he gets into. Or even when there's an episode about another character, he's the one in it. He's the one that still has to come in and do something.
This is tough. This is tougher to me than Mark Hamill.
Yeah, I will. I'm biased, and I'll give my score first because I know I'm biased, and I know there's a lot to factor. But when I take in cultural impact, when I take in the level of enjoyment, the highs versus the lows, I am confident giving an 8.5 for Homer. I mean, the cultural impact alone, the amount of laughs that were given, the amount of notoriety in the heyday. This would probably be different for someone who's younger than me, but I lived it. I lived it as a kid, and so 8.5.
I was leaning 8.1.
Well, we are very agreeable today.
We are. That means we're on 8.3, and again, we will not tell Sean, and he might tank this, but to Sean's credit, even though he's not a big Simpsons person, he does care a lot about cultural impact and things that endure and, what's relevant in the conversation. So I think it's possible that holds, but it doesn't leave a ton of wiggle room. So I guess we'll have to kind of see what becomes of it, because anything lower than a 7.4 will put him in Hall of Tame. I keep forgetting. It's been so long. I used to have these in my head, and now it was dumb. I thought it'd be smart to try and rhyme them all, but like everything else we did with naming conventions back then, it was not smart. It was not.
You know that The Simpsons has renewed through season 36?
Yeah. And at this point, what would stop them? Even if one of the principal voice actors died,
I mean, Julie Kavner can barely talk nowadays. I don't know if you've heard recent episodes of Marge. It's not good.
No, and why would it be with that voice?
Yeah, I don't understand, but I guess if they're still getting paid what they're getting paid per episode, like, all right, I'll show up and read my lines and go home.
I am certainly not a person who would say that voice acting isn't work. It obviously is, and it's a unique talent, and you have to preserve your voice because it's your livelihood. So I have a ton of respect for voice actors. Some people don't. However, I can see people still being like, well, $300,000 an episode. Like, you can talk to your horse. I don't care. It's like, well, no, you damage your vocal cords at a certain point. But yes, I get where you're coming from. It's the same thing with like pro athletes or whatever. Like, no, they don't really deserve to make this much, but somebody's making money out of this, so they should be among that conversation.
Exactly.
All right. So one fame for now, one tame for now. And Dave brought up an interesting one for the third one. We talk about how at any given moment you can have a spot in this change. One thing we could have done was try and look at it only from the perspective of people whose at least careers were over, if not lives. But that's kind of morbid. And in a way, I don't mind the fact that this is more of a living document that could be updated down the road. So, for example, we mentioned Johnny Depp earlier, who is in Tame, and I don't think would have improved in our panel, but you never know. Like, if we went back and revoted, at least the score would budge one way or the other. This one is kind of a factor of timing. If 18 months ago we had mentioned that we were going to do Will Smith in Hall of Fame, we would have been like, oh, he's probably like in the 7 or 8 range. Maybe he makes the cut. Maybe he doesn't. Like, he's got a pretty good career. But then the Oscars happened last year, and now the conversation around Will Smith has changed drastically, even though that was really only one incident that still kind of outshadows an entire career worth of other work. So our task is going to be, where does Will Smith fall? This is one that Sean will be sad to have missed, but it's okay because at a certain point we have to do something without him. What are we gonna do? Review like Last of Us without him? I mean, I can try, but
I can do this. I can just do the whole thing. I watched it, and I've almost beaten the game now. I'm very close to beating this 10-year-old game.
Well, what's nice is that you will have beaten it by the time we review the show, so you'll be able to talk about both at length. But
absolutely,
regardless, Will Smith now up for debate. Will he be the first person not to make it into Fame or Tame?
Man, timing is so everything, because in the 90s, early 2000s, I don't know that you would have rated anybody much higher. I mean, popularity-wise, music, movies, personality. I don't know that anyone in the late 90s, early 2000s was more popular, and I don't think that's hyperbole to say that. He was in the biggest movies, had two different rap albums that he had out, had no, as far as I know, no personal issues, whatever, like anything like that. It was just constant hit after hit, good publicity after good publicity, up until, I don't know, a few years ago. Really, he was still pretty popular through a lot of different things.
It's interesting that he really had such a home run in what, I don't know if it was his first role, but obviously Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was very early, if not the first thing he did. If he did something else, Lord knows it's probably a bit part or something. If he had like a recurring role, I don't know of it. But Fresh Prince, especially for early 90s, again, are there other like important black sitcoms? Sure. Like we can go back to the lineage with the Jeffersons, and we had a couple in the mid 80s, and like Family Matter. Like there are others, no question. But Fresh Prince tapped into a demographic that had not seen itself represented on television yet. So the impact of that is undeniable. And that's why the hardest part of this to me is going to be, there's no question that the slap is always going to resonate with people and definitely is going to dock his score. It's a question of how much, but it's like, okay, as bad as that whole situation was, does it undo this career of work where it's like you said, I mean, late 90s, early 2000s, one of, if not the biggest actors in Hollywood?
I mean, the problem that it seems, and I mean, if you look at his filmography, I mean, he's played a number of different roles, a number of very different characters throughout there. He's also played the same character frequently as well. But I mean, some of the later ones, I Am Legend, Pursuit of Happiness, Aladdin even, was very different types of roles than what he had done in the past. And when he did Ali, for example, like there were times that when he went into a movie, it's gonna be like, holy shit, Will Smith is in this movie. It's gonna be a good one because Will Smith is in it, and it's that doesn't exist the same way anymore. I haven't seen one of his newer ones, Emancipation. I actually kind of wanted to see that because it looked like him really trying to show off his acting chops, but it's like I said at the time, I don't know that you could find someone that had a bigger draw. Maybe Tom Hanks, maybe. But like, if it was a Will Smith movie, it's like, yeah, you probably want to go see that movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to forget now because it's been like 25 years. But the first Men in Black was a huge deal,
massive.
And sure, the sequels were too. But we're coming on the tails of Fresh Prince, and Will Smith is really coming into his own, and that is a massive movie at the box office. So, like, just that alone, if we just mentioned those two, it's like, okay, now we're talking about an all-time great just because of the heights that those two, show and movie, reached. And then you talk about some of the other roles. You mentioned, Ali. Even more recently, while maybe Suicide Squad didn't do the greatest, nobody was really upset with his turn in it. It was just, did the movie do well enough overall? Was it promoted well enough, etc.? I don't know that I needed him in Aladdin.
No.
To be fair, I don't know that I needed anybody in Aladdin. That is not just a Will Smith problem. And if you had to pick someone to replace Robin Williams as the genie, I think there are a lot worse picks. Now, the whole Disney live action thing is a whole other subject we could probably do as a standalone episode. But the point is, there wasn't anything wrong with the idea of it other than doing it at all. It wasn't like it was Will Smith's fault in that role. But there are a couple more recent stumbles. But then again, Concussion was really good, so I'm all over the map. When you have a long enough career, you're not all going to have hits. There's going to be misses in there, and his hits are generally bigger than his misses.
Yep. I mean, if you look at some of the names of he was in Fresh Prince of Bel-Air from 1990 to 96, and that was one of the most popular shows of the early 90s. The list is not long ahead of it of the most popular shows of that time. It was massive. Immediately after that, Men in Black. Right after that, right before that, Independence Day. I mean, holy moly, that was a huge movie in 1996.
Well, let's do it this way. Let's go year by year. Because basically coming out of towards the end of Fresh Prince, 95 is Bad Boys, which we would be remiss if we didn't mention. Then Independence Day, then Men in Black. There's one a year for each year here. Then Enemy of the State, which was well received. And then Wild Wild West, which we've talked about on the show before, is a guilty pleasure for some. I don't think anybody's going to sit here and argue it's a great movie, but some people like it despite its flaws. But still, I mean, these are all big-time box office draws. So like we mentioned, around the turn of the century / millennium, his name is up there with Hanks and a couple others as far as the biggest stars you can possibly think of, like Clooney, Cruise. That's that pantheon at that time. But even coming into the 2000s, I mean, Bagger Vance did fine. Ali, you mentioned, was really well done. And then, we have some sequels, which was inevitable with that level of popularity. There's the Men in Black sequel, Bad Boys. We get iRobot in there eventually, which, high concept, I think, has aged pretty well.
Better, but...
Yeah. And then after that, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that he fell off, because there's still some big-time movies in there. At the very least, they did well, even if they weren't necessarily critical darlings. I mean, The Pursuit of Happiness is in there. I Am Legend, Hancock, where... I don't know.
I like that movie.
I kind of liked Hancock, I'll be honest.
I did too. It was weird, but I liked it.
Yeah. There's the Karate Kid remake, which, again, I'm pretty loyal when it comes to source material. I don't feel it needs to be remade, but then again, I love Cobra Kai, so I'm a hypocrite. So take that for what it's worth. So, overall, it's it didn't maintain past really 2000, 2001-ish, I would say. Not to say he wasn't a big star still, but he wasn't at that level, the apex. But there's not necessarily any harm in that. It's hard to maintain that level, and even some of the biggest stars we just mentioned haven't really done it either.
Yeah. I feel, and maybe this is a feeling and just not based in fact, but the more he tried to get his family involved in his work, his kids, wife, things like that, things didn't go as well for him. And that's kind of sad in its own way, but I feel that's... I mean, he had made that After Earth movie, which was based on a book, where he had his son in it. He had Karate Kid, where his son was in that. I don't think those went over well, and I think that hurt his popularity and then made him, in a way, again, outside his perspective, be like, well, you don't like what the stuff my family's in? And then made him almost more reclusive with his family, which then seems to have led to some of the familial problems that have come down the road now.
Yeah, because once you start mentioning the family, we sort of have to get to the elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
whether or not Will Smith is a cuck is a discussion for another time, although you might argue it's really only for this time. However, what happened where he basically just went up on stage and slapped the shit out of Chris Rock is certainly strange. I remember, like, I wasn't watching. I've never watched an Oscars. I have no intention of doing so, but I certainly remember seeing Twitter just light itself on fire that night. And rightfully so. As much as Twitter can be a cesspool of like nothingness most of the time, it made sense that a lot of people were talking about this moment because one man just slapped another man on national television for a joke about his wife. And regardless of what you thought, especially that night when it wasn't 100% clear what was going on, certain broadcasts only showed part of it, like it was a whole maelstrom of a mess, right? But we have the benefit of some perspective now. We're not doing this the night after that happened. We're doing it more than a year after it happened. And by all accounts, Will Smith was kind of just out of line. Mm-hmm. You're hard-pressed to make an argument, at the very least, in his favor. You can certainly justify the behavior to a certain extent, but it's hard. I mean, yeah, it's the internet. You can find any take if you really want to try, but for the most part, people aren't like, you know what, I think Will Smith was right to slap Chris Rock. So it's one moment in one award show on a guy who's had basically like a 30-year career at this point, but it was also in the wrong era for it. If he had done this 30 years ago when he was just starting out without social media, we probably think of it as a footnote. But I don't think anybody can think of this as a footnote, and that's not only because only a year has passed.
It just brought to light all of the other things that have been talked about with this relationship. His kids being a little odd, seemingly. And I don't know how you raise normal kids in that situation with the amount of popularity he had. But, there's talk of the open relationship between the two of them. And they're married, but they also see other people apparently. And I don't know. I'm not here to judge any of that type of stuff. I think you find happiness with your partner in many, many different ways. And I'm not about to judge any sort of polyamorous couple for that. If that's what works for them, great. But the biggest problem that I think came with that whole slap was it seemed, and left looking at the video again, it was like Will laughed at it. And then Jada looked over and was pissed off. And he's like, oh shit, I have to go do something about this. And that is like, oh, that's not a healthy relationship at all. It's like, you can't be like, oh, she's going to be mad at me if I don't take this. So that was also the biggest concern of that whole thing was the reaction afterward.
Yeah, because it's like everything except the slap was probably fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably not the right move to yell at somebody to keep your wife's name out of your effing mouth. I don't know why I'm choosing not to swear now, but I am.
It's just, because he swore on the Oscars, and they had to dump the whole thing basically live.
And even if he had done that, which would have still had some blowback, it wouldn't have been like this. It would have been like, well, maybe that's an overreaction to a joke. Like other people had jokes about them, and they either laughed along, or maybe they didn't look thrilled, but they didn't swear at the performer on stage. But none of that really holds up because was this premeditated? No, I don't think so. I think he was put in an awkward situation, as you mentioned, because he was like, that's kind of something. Oh, no, my wife's pissed. Oh, I got to do something. He still had the entire time it took him to walk up there. They were seated towards the front. But that entire time he's striding up to the stage, he has moments to not do that. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't take any of them. Mm-hmm. So, at that point, I think, again, one moment certainly reflects poorly. I don't blame people for thinking less of him because of it. I will admit, I also think he compounded that when Chris Rock finally put this to his own benefit and had the comedy special just a couple weeks ago now, basically right before the Oscars, which smart timing.
Chris Rock is really smart.
Yeah, he's a smart dude. So when he had that come out, and it was unsurprisingly pretty harsh about Will Smith and his role in the whole situation, and then Will Smith's response.
I need to watch the second half.
Yeah, exactly. And then Will Smith's response would be like, "I was kind of surprised and hurt by it." I'm like, I don't think you get to be. You shouldn't be surprised, and you probably don't get to be hurt. Mm-hmm. I understand that you probably do feel hurt, but I don't think you get to complain about it because you're the bad actor in this. And that's an unfortunate phrasing given what he does for a career, but you get what I mean. I don't feel sorry for you because you're sad that he said those things about you. You probably deserved it and more.
He physically struck another man on national TV. I don't know. Maybe this is I'm a lover, not a fighter type person. I'd rather not resort to violence. I haven't really I've gotten one minor fight in my life, and I don't think I ever will again unless I'm blatantly attacked. So I don't like physical confrontations. I never want to. So it's difficult for me to imagine that. Me being in that situation.
So we have to score.
Yep.
On the one hand,
the
slap. On the other hand, Fresh Prince. Because I'm going to be honest, I mean, Men in Black's good. And
I love Men in Black.
Like Independence Day is good, and I actually really liked him. There's nobody else that could have played Ali. It's the perfect casting for that. Like, there are definitely movies of his I like, but I wouldn't say there's any movies of his that I love. Fresh Prince I actually loved, especially growing up, because, again, it was just so unlike anything else I was seeing on television at the time. So it's tough because I have at least a connection to one show in particular. And, again, there's plenty of other things that, even though I don't love them, I'll still acknowledge were huge. We mentioned, like, again, for a 6-year span, you maybe couldn't find anybody bigger. I don't want to put him in shame.
Oh.
That's way too low. Lame, what does Lame go up to? Let me pull it up real quick.
Lame is up to 5.9.
5.9.
He's definitely not
3.1 to 5.9. I think shame would be, I mean, I'm not going to tell you how to vote, but just for speaking for me, giving him a score that would put him in shame is way too much of an overcorrection.
Oh, yeah.
If he had killed Chris Rock, we might be having a different conversation. But,
we might not be having the conversation, period. To be honest.
I mean, we've seen the slapping league. I mean, you can actually hurt somebody with a slap. In this case, I'm going to give him a 6.5. I just can't go any lower. That's frustrating because having him end up in Tame with some other people, it feels like a bad reflection on our tiers. But, at some point we can always revisit them if that ends up being the case.
Well, this is just the most boring show ever because I was thinking the literal exact same number you were. And I thought that beforehand. This is not a copying situation. This is exactly what I thought is 6.5. And it's difficult to rate that because it feels like you are penalized for the longevity of your career unless you're a unique case. Tom Hanks, for example, I don't think he's going to be penalized for the longevity of his career. He seems to keep always knocking them out of the park. However, most others, something happens throughout their life that makes it not get knocked down, such as Will Smith. I think that the real issue is the new stuff, really, the way his life seemingly, his family situation doesn't seem to be, it seems off for a little bit. He's making it work, but it didn't give the impression that his personal life is all that great. And that's just from the outside, and I can't judge him too much on that. But his reactions to different things, like the slap on the Oscars, some of his other movies, outside of that 6-year window, I liked I Am Legend a lot. I don't know. There's been a lot of movies that I'm like, yes, Will Smith, yes. So that's kind of honestly what brings it down for me a little bit more is that his early stuff was really good, but then it kind of backed off a little bit and hasn't continued. So 6.5.
Well, I mean, to do the math on that, he would need an 11 to make the Hall of Fame. So that's probably not going to happen. I think that's illegal.
Sean has and will continue to try to break a segment.
That's true. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it would have to be sub 5 to dip into Lame, Hall of Lame, because it needs to be 5.9, so it has to be just below a 6. So he might end up taking up residence there, which I guess, again, I'm conflicted because at this moment, there's no way. But again, I feel like if you do this, certainly pre-slap, but even like 10 years ago, he might be in consideration for fame.
Mm-hmm.
Like he was that important for a good decade plus.
Yep.
But now, as more time has gone, like you said, and it's tough because I feel like if you just retire, if you fade from the public spotlight, then you're working indoors, and it doesn't really hurt you long term. But you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become Will Smith.
Yep, exactly. I want to address Doug's comment of speaking of The Last of Us, submission for Hall of Fame is Pedro Pascal. That one is going to be a time thing, I think, because lately, holy moly, I don't know if there's a lot of big TV actors right now. He's way up there on the list.
Yeah.
But let's see how, that's definitely one to revisit. If you do it now, you definitely want to revisit in 10 years and see how things go.
Yeah, massive right now, no question. Mm-hmm. But what are we looking at pre 2018?
I'd not heard of him before Mandalorian. I don't think most people had, to be fair.
I know he has a career before that, but yeah, that one might benefit from giving him more time to accrue really good credits. He certainly seems to be in his element right now. And, again, we talk about, just like if you're looking at a sports Hall of Fame, it's about peaks. It's about, how did you stand out? What's your legacy? How long did you manage to stay at that level? Kind of like we talked about with Will Smith in particular. He doesn't have the pedigree yet, but I put him on our list anyways for future consideration, because hopefully by the time we get to him, maybe in 3 or 4 years, there'll be enough there that it won't count against him, because he'll have more of a breadth of a career to stand on.
Man, he's 47. He definitely came in late to the game, but can't complain.
It's working out for him. I mean, again,
no kidding.
Not going to find too much bigger television projects in the last 4 years. So,
nope.
And who knows what the future holds for him? Because again, now that it's one thing just to have like Mandalorian, but now that you're the anchor of another cultural phenomenon, it's going to open doors. Hopefully, they're good doors and not bad ones. With his pedigree, I think that's certainly possible.
Yep.
All right, that's the end of the episode. Thank you for joining us for Hall of Fame. Let us know what you think or where you would rate people in the comments. We could have in the live chat. I should have said that at the beginning, but it's too late now. Your votes don't count. Sorry. We'll circle back at some point and get Sean's take on them, probably just at the start of another episode, and see how that turns out. And we can officially enshrine people in one of the wings of the Hall of Fame /tame/lame/shame. Maybe I'll rename them. I haven't decided.
Yeah, they all rhyme. I like it.
I mean, you get the idea. They all rhyme, like you said. It was where's the rhyme? But it also makes it confusing. So I'm like, wait, is lame worse than shame? Of course. I mean, no, it makes sense that shame is worse than lame, but I never remember off the top of my head. We'll be back next week with a regular episode. As always, thank you for watching and or listening. In between episodes, you can find us at our website, objectionnetwork.com or youtube.com/objectionnetwork. I promise, between like weather and everybody's jobs and everything else, things are going to level out here eventually, so we'll get back on the horse soon. I promise. We'll see you next time.